So, hi everyone. Thank you so much for inviting me to speak today. I would like to thank the Association for Practical Ethics, Practical and Professional Ethics for organizing and giving me this opportunity to talk. And the title of my presentation is called The Death of Profits, Social Responsibility in Corporations. So who am I? I am Brian Lee. I am a second year PhD student in humanities at York University, Toronto, and my email is ryan21@my.york.ca. I will I'll I'll repeat my contact info again at the very end. And let's get right into it. So a bit of context for my presentation. So during the start of the 2019 pandemic, we see this increase in price gouging, corporations increasing their shareholder values in order to make more money. And you see companies like Pfizer, BioNTech, Moderna making so much money from their profits. And it seems like this profit, especially given the need for medical care, is against public interest. So my interest is, first off, why is it morally wrong and how do we understand it, right? So how do we understand this problem, right? And so I think the first step is, well, I think my thesis is the solution is finding out and understanding that this social responsibility comes through in the form of balancing act of meeting contractual obligations, right? It's about making sure that we are balancing how we ensure that our obligations are balanced out with public interests, right? Making sure that we're making an honest corporations are doing honest business with while making sure that they take care of public interests. And really the antithesis of this is companies who seek out monopolies and attempt to sell products at abnormal prices. I'll get more into this later on. It might be a bit confusing currently, but I will get into some of the definitions we work on. So in essence, how do we explain this behavior? And second, how do we understand this moral wrong? And third, and how do we sort of define specific guidelines that prevent profiteering from occurring? And so a bit more on the learning objectives. How do we understand the difference between profiteering, honest business? This is really important distinction, honest business versus profiteering. This will make more sense later on. How we learn the language of economics in order to defeat capitalism. This is specifically a sort of nod to Marx, but anyways. And how do we sort of nurture, preserve, and cultivate a culture that promotes a balancing act of obligations? And yeah, these are learning objectives. So let's get started with the table of contents. First, I'll break down the corporation and corporate law, what backs up this sort of profiteering behavior. Then second, I'll go into the critique of corporations. And third, I'll try to break down capitalism even more. And that's when I go into this balancing act. So part one, corporation and corporate law. So some key definitions, what do we mean by profiteering? A person or group who engages in activities of obtaining profit above a more reasonable limit. So again, someone who sort of sells their commodities at a higher price and obtains money that's well above more reasonable limit. I will define out that definition even more. The second is a publicly traded corporation where you have ownership that is traded amongst the public and shareholders have a claim in the dividends, and social responsibility where you have corporations that have both a function and to make money and share public interest. I'll get a bit more into the last one, but for now, I want to get into publicly traded corporation. And this really ties into how a publicly traded corporation is organized. So you have, your board of directors, your executives, and you have certain shareholders who own partial ownership of the corporation. Sometimes the board of directors can also be shareholders and own, a majority of the shares. You have the chairperson, you have the manager. And so this is generally the overall rough structure. Now, usually the assumption, especially the shareholder primacy that view that I'm going to explain later on, some people just assume that shareholders sort of are the residual claimants for the profits. This isn't exactly the case. Now I'll explain why. Now, in every corporation, like any house or any person, right, in order to start a business, they need capital, right? And money, so to speak. In this world of economics, right? This entire world runs on money, right? Especially in this capitalist environment, right? And so, in order for a corporation gain capital, right, you need money. So the difference and how they get it is between equity and debt. Now, to explain equity and debt, I'll first explain the debt part, because the analogy here is when you buy a house. Whenever you buy a house, for those of you who probably do know, you put a down payment on your house when you go to the bank. The bank offers you a loan, and you have to, through monthly or weekly payments, whenever, however your bank does the thing, you pay it off with added interest, right? And failure to pay and make those payments, you might have to give up your house foreclosure. And that's kind of the basics. It's kind of a simplified version of debt financing, but essentially the same thing works for corporations, in a sense that for corporations, right, you can go to the bank and you can ask for a loan, and the same thing applies, right? Failure to make payments will result in banks foreclosing on property. Now, this is exactly why corporations themselves don't seek out debt financing, or very rarely, which is because there's such a huge strong conditions involved when it comes to paying off your loans or debt, which is why some people go into equity finance. They open up their corporations and they become publicly owned. Now they divide up their partial ownership to shareholders, which they can buy for certain money, right? This is a stock market, everyone may be familiar with this. And the corporations keep the money earned from the shares as capital, aka money. So essentially, right, when you use the capital and you pay off all your expenses, you might have some other bank loans and payroll, making payment. What's left, right, is the residual amount, right? What's left from the money earned from your service or your sale, right? And in finance or accounting, that's, revenue minus expenses equals profit, right? And that's financing. That's what you do when you make payroll. And there's further, even down the line, lawsuits if you don't, pay off these sort of contractual obligations, right? And these equity shareholders are known as the risk bearers because of the fact that they own partial ownership. They can claim the profit, right? They can claim what is left over. And so when you look at these investors, right? They're given voting rights, their ability to attend investor meetings to talk about these things, and if the company isn't doing well, they can essentially they have the ability to vote off board directors. For those of you who may be familiar with, I think Elon Musk was also almost voted off, which is kind of funny. Anyways, but so it's this idea that investors or risk bearers, right, that they are almost obligated in a sense to receive the profit, what is left over. Now, this is known as the shareholder primacy view, right? And Milton Friedman kind of talked about this in his essays. The social responsibility of a business is to increase its profits. So here, right, there's a clear sort of standard. This is also known as the standard model, where the shareholders are the residual claimants to the profit of corporations. And of course, Procter and Gamble and Johnson & Johnson increased their quarterly dividends by a lot. But this is a misconception. Of course, Lynn Stout says that, and her argument really is this is a very wrong and hurtful view to keep, because shareholders, in order for a company to release their dividends, they need to, two conditions must be met. First, a company's board of directors needs to declare that the company is doing well financially. And second, and they need to declare whatever money they have left over as dividends, right? So there's already these sort of barriers that prevent someone from just declaring straight right that certain amount of money is just pure profit, and just discard it as dividends out to people. So they can't just pass it out willy-nilly without any sort of standard. And so again, right, you look at the structure of a publicly traded company, right? It's important to remember that this company, corporation speaking, I'm going to use company and corporation interchangeably now, that this corporation is itself a corporate entity, right? So we have to treat this almost as a person, right? And you look at the board of directors, right? They themselves are also entitled to receive part of the profits. And that shareholders aren't immediately entitled to the residual profit left over, right? Shareholders are not guaranteed. And so in a way, right, there's a sort of freedom that the board of directors have when it comes down to how they spend their profit, right? How they spend what they earn, right? And you can see there's a bit of problems, right? There's almost an unlimited freedom that can be had with how they spend their money. And why not, right? If contract defines those terms, right, then a contract can be legally binding, right? Contracts are signed by consenting parties, and they can only be overruled by showing that they weren't acting on fiduciary duties. And these board of directors have, right, and I want to return to this last point, right, that is only towards maximizing profit, increasing shareholder value. And as long as they respect the business judgment rule, where corporations, as long as they act in the standards of care and loyalty towards their business, right, everything is fine. Sorry, I'm skipping over this. I'm just taking care of the time. Critique of corporations. So most of this argument is based off Joel Balkin's book, and he argued that businesses alike are structured to exploit others for profit, right? And this singular focus is is what will cause essentially the downfall, because corporations will fail to sort of take responsibility for their actions, right? And you look at the Deepwater Horizon oil spill, this COVID pandemic, you see corporations cutting corners in order to ensure that they protect their financial self-interest, right? And so there doesn't seem to be a weighing out process of positive negatives. You even see this lobbying process as well, this 2-for-1, and that was later Biden revoked, but by imposing on existing and new regulations, it becomes much harder for corporations to introduce new regulations, right? To introduce one, you need to get rid of two. So who regulates who, right? It seems like corporations these days are involved and are taking control. And this is something that Bakken, I mostly draw from his argument, but you can read people like Naomi Klein, and other people. Sorry, I'm blanking out right now. But corporations should be regulated by board of directors, not the government or an ethics board, right? And this is the view, right, that they should be regulated by board of directors. And even with the conscientious efforts, right, Bakken says that these are just effortless, right? They're just sort of deflecting the responsibility onto us. Why are we using environmental unfriendly products? And this is really a conflict between profit motive versus public health, right? A conflict between individual health, right? You see people, corporation upselling people, increasing the prices, and you see health supply, we see an increase in the demand for healthcare, while supply, you see the ventilators. So we prioritize the economy over health desires of individuals. And of course, I couldn't talk about this without Donald Trump. We cannot let the cure be worse than the problem itself. Suggesting that the economy is more important than the individual. And it's all protected by corporate law, right? Because why not, right? If the contract says so, as long as they're, care and good faith, right? Why not? And even in the government attempts with wage subsidies, this is Canada, I grew up in Canada. We look at the wage subsidies, and still there's no sort of significant change. So part 3, understanding capitalism. Sorry, I have to watch out for the time. And so this idea of freedom is built off of Adam Smith's idea of the invisible hand, right? The economy is guided by an invisible hand that promotes the well-being of the market, right? That, we don't have to do anything, right? The market will take care of itself, right? And anytime you purchase something from the economy, this idea of, supply and demand, how, and this is, Adam Smith, how he was popular about the letting the market or the invisible force take care of itself. And this freedom essentially allows competition to rise, right? It's the more competition you have, the more sort of products and innovation that will take place. And that's creates the market, right? The exchange value, how real value is placed on each commodity, and based on other. So the way that a certain item is worth, it's based on another substitute. So if you go to the market, you buy a potato, that thing may be more expensive if another substitute, the price of it is lower. So like a substitute would be like tomatoes or something like that. And so the example that Adam Smith gives is barter and bread, and how when a meat vendor sells their meat in the market, the how much bread they can purchase is dependent on how much money they made off of their sales off the meat. And so if they sell for a lot, then they can buy more bread. And it kind of gives you an example of how kind of money works, right? It's always exchange value, how much other stuff is worth on the market. Which is weird, right? Right? Because you consider the water diamond paradox, depending on how much labor required, right? Water has a greater need, but the labor required to produce it isn't as much. So, which is why diamonds are worth more. Says a lot about society, right? And how, it values more on this idea of supply and demand. The more supply and less demand, the lower price will be. But the more demand and less supply, think about ventilators, the higher the price will become. Um, and this is why you have this idea of undertaking risks, right? Corporations undertake risk in order to sell a product, or and they invest their own money into a business. And so the real wage that an entrepreneur makes is the profit gain, right? That's what they earn off of the sales. And they convert that, right? If some of you are familiar with Marx, right? This is the conversion of CMC, how you convert from commodity to money to commodity. Anyways, and this is why a lot of people look at their financial statements, right? Any losses that or decrease in the quarterly statement will look bad for corporations. And this is when, investors may become risk averse, and you have hostile takeovers where shareholders may choose to vote off certain board members if and so obviously people may find to take a risk in order to perform the job well, to increase their quarterly statement. But obviously, this is a problem, right? Because that introduces the problem of monopolies and how people want to sell the products more greater than what's supposed to be. And so, following from, at least from this logic, at least, monopolies seem to be the cause of profiteering. And the only way, at least from capitalist stance, is competition, free markets. But ultimately, the goal that Adam Smith wanted to make was to increase demand by, improving society, right? That was his ultimate goal. But somewhere along the lines, this changed. But obviously, there's still a problem here, right? There seems to be a problem where we're more concerned about quarterly earnings, right? There's this conflict between object and subject, person and thing, so obviously something's more wrong, right? How do we encourage corporations from stop selling their products at prices higher than natural price? So what I'm not trying to do is any ideals or revolutions. I'm not, a solution must exist in here and now, and it must be binding towards all sort of members of society. And so how do we cooperate, right? How do we encourage collective action so that a person down the line, a single individual, won't break the rules, and it won't prevent others from acting on their own self-interest? And so potential solutions, you can look towards empathy, right? You can look to the shared understanding and emotion of others. You can look to how others feel or think. You can argue using images. Now, this is obviously limited, but again, to the emotions and visual aid, you can look towards eliminating corporations, right? This is Bachman's solution. Eliminating corporations entirely. Corporations are made to, by corporate law. And so they, if they're designed to act on self-interest, what are they doing, right? We should eliminate it entirely. We might look to tax them a bit more. But this is problematic because investors are risk averse and will look for loopholes. So either way, it's kind of like catch-22. There really is no way. Or we can just eliminate profit altogether, right? Prevent people selling from higher, their natural price. Now, a solution on its own might not work. But what if we try to combine all solutions together, right? I mean, the last thing we want to do is avoid a tug of war where we pull on one end and to the other. So what if we instead balance all our interests by understanding first, right, that is an honest business for people to make, for corporations to make, but there comes a point in which you have to get rid of all that natural price things. And so the analogy that Lynn Stout uses is, a parent who balance out their interests with their siblings, right? And that's how we have to view it, right? As business corporations, as an economic institution, you have to see it as a social service as well as a profit-making function, and that corporations should be led by their fiduciaries that have the best interests for not just a corporation, but for the public as well, a balancing act. And Andrew Sayer, right, he talks about this idea of the moral economy. Now, due to time limit, my apologies, I'm just going to skip out on this, but it pretty much talks about what we should look out for, the type of questions, the standards, sorry about that. And corporate law should reflect these changes, right? There shouldn't be legal contracts that are so sort of we have to keep them standard. It should be a case-by-case basis. And make your best guesses, right? That's the best thing we can do. And we should reward good behavior. And we should acknowledge the good deeds and not just call out the bad ones, right? Create a culture that values honesty, transparency, and respect for all. Corporations that don't price gouge and don't sort of, increase their prices above a certain level, and recognize that we are all on the same boat. And together as a society, the building blocks, right? Balancing out these obligations, balancing all of that. And yeah, thank you. That is my presentation. Sorry for the rush at the end. Yeah, my apologies.
Thank you, and nicely done, Ryan. I know we got to get into our next talk. However, do you want to address the question by Celeste in the chat there? She's saying we can skip it. Okay. So
can I
go ahead?
Oh, sorry. Okay. So the short answer, sorry, Dan, sorry if I'm cutting your time. Yeah, so the short answer is, the board of directors, there is a singular profit, and how you divide it up is, I mean, it's really, sorry, I was closing something. And how you divide it up is pretty much, it's really up to the board of directors. If they decide, 100% of it goes to the shareholders, then yes. If they decide for themselves if they want to do that, then sure. Or if they want to redistribute it to the rest of the company, then it's really up to them. And that's what I was saying was like, the freedom involved, right? There's a level of exploitation that's readily available. And which is funny, right? Because corporate law is about trying to smooth out these gray zones, and yet it doesn't seem like it's doing exactly just that. It seems like it's almost creating more vagueness, I would say, especially when it comes to how profit is distributed and how it can be distributed. There's a lot of room for exploit, and sorry, that's a long-winded answer.
Perfect. Thank you, Ryan. Up next, we have Dan Doviak with Mapping Context of Fair Allocation. Dan, take it away.